Welcome back. Hello if you're new here. Today I'm here to talk about new release horror books that I've recently read, so I'm here with reviews. I have a mix of book, variety of subgenres, and I really think something for everyone. So if that all sounds good, let's get started. First, let's talk about Beauties by Rushby, and this is a story that is set over two different timelines. We have part of the story told from the perspective of a woman in the present day living in Seoul, Korea, and then we also have a past perspective in the 1700s. And what ties these two stories and timelines together is particularly the fact that both of these timelines involve these female figures that are made out of wax. And so this is a piece of horror that very much leans into some body horror, and it ties together in some interesting ways as the story continues on. This is one that I will admit I wanted to love a touch more than I did. I think the synopsis, the premise, the setup is great. I'd be lying if I didn't say this is one of the most gorgeous horror covers to come out this year. And for me, this book is still doing a lot of things right, but mostly it didn't hit quite the highs I was hoping for. And I think largely it's due to the fact that the way that the story is put together, I felt like it deserved better prose. The story is very functional, the writing is fine, but I want to have a story like this with really lush writing. I felt like this one didn't hit the potential that it could have, if it had something more in the style of The Historian or other books that really you can sink your teeth into. Instead, this one felt very modern even when you're reading the past perspective, and so it again was still a good story, but I will be honest that it fell below my expectations. But again, if you're like me and you hear that synopsis, you see this cover, I think a lot of you will still want to pick it up yourselves, so definitely go in with your own expectations and let me know what you think of it. Next up is Honeyeater by Kathleen, Jennings, and this is one that is a dark fantasy with elements of horror, so depending on how you classify it, but I think it better fits into this video than my normal SFF because this is closer to horror than it would be to something like the epic fantasy that normally gets lumped into those videos. So anyway, with this one, it takes place in this sleepy small town that has its secrets. We follow the perspective of Charlie, this young boy who really wants to get out of this town. However, he is pulled into the secrets of the town when he ends up connecting with this young woman, and so together they get raveled into everything that is going on. It's one that is very short in terms of a story, and I really don't want to give away too much. I will say that this is the kind of story that very much in my mind is reminiscent of things like Wilder Girls, which again is one of those books that kind of falls into multiple genres and often gets labeled as horror but doesn't necessarily fit the normal horror tropes, which for some people is fantastic. This is one that I really want to love, but if I'm honest with my own personal taste, I've never loved books in this subgenre. Again, they're ones that I want to love. I check them out every time I read through them, and they're simply not to my taste. But I do think that if you again love Wilder Girls, this one is very much on par with that. And I have no real criticisms of this one other than it not necessarily being to my taste. I will note that again, if you're looking for a full-fleshed horror novel, you won't necessarily get there. Instead, you kind of just get that dark, beautiful, creepy aspects to it. And if you're someone who again loves a story first and foremost for the creepy atmosphere, the unsettling piece, and really like nice prose, this one definitely hit those highs. So I do recommend it for those that are looking for those things. Next up, we have Demon Song by Kelsea, and this is a story that follows a daughter and mother who at the beginning of the story, this is all in the setup, are escaping from the grasp of an abusive man, and so they end up going into hiding with a somewhat family friend and are hiding away in Beijing. There, this daughter is very lonely. She's by herself in this strange place because again, she actually grew up in America. So for her, coming back to this place really does not have the same ties as it does for those around her. And so you find her eventually connecting with another individual and then getting introduced to the opera house. And so of course, this is a horror story. So eventually there will be some supernatural elements that are introduced and the story goes on from there. This is one where I really enjoy the cultural elements. I love stories that bring in different perspectives, as I've often said so many times in videos, and that is very much the case here. I think it's very accessible in that way because again, you have someone coming from an American background into China. So I think it's again meant to be approachable to those that again are looking at the culture more so from the outside and are trying to understand it better without necessarily having a lot of context or contextual details outside of of this book. I will note that because of the age of the character, this book did feel young. As best I know, Titan Books does publish primarily adult fiction, or I believe this one is targeted as that, but it definitely felt more like young adult. So if you are someone who is sensitive to any books where the characters feel very young, it's very much a character who, again, is impressionable, immature, and very much finding their way. So I didn't mind it, but with that, I feel like this book could have been punchier. It felt a little bit safe in terms of the horror, so just know what you're getting yourself into. If you read a lot of YA horror, I definitely recommend this one. If you don't mind a horror book that, again, plays it a little bit safer with still having some interesting elements to it, this is one you may want to pick up. Next up, we have House of Idyll by Delilah S. Dawson, and this is one where we follow a young woman who is a struggling songwriter, and so she goes off to the secluded place to write. When she is there, she is there as a guest to the host of this famous rock star. However, this is again a horror story, so terrible things ensue. I picked this one up because I have read and loved most of Delilah S. Dawson's previous books, and so at this point I do want to read everything she has written. This book suffered from the fact that it falls into a subgenre of what I call rock star horror, where the horror elements are all centered around music, life, and very much a lot of the story felt like it was a callback to nostalgia of, again, the rock star lifestyle and all of that, which is just not something I have a personal connection to. I have a very basic relationship with the music that I listen to, and I just felt like this book, in terms of who it was targeted for, was just clearly not targeted for me. Not that I can only read books that are from a perspective that I recognize or appreciate, but if I'm honest, I just wasn't overly connected to this one. I found the writing to be fine, but not some of the prettiest prose I've seen by her. Instead, this one felt much more plot focused, which again would be fine if you have a connection to the plot. So again, I think that it's very much a case of finding the right readers for this one. I didn't find it objectively bad. I didn't find any parts that really broke my suspension of disbelief. I just didn't find it as interesting of a story, and again, just really not to my taste. Next up, we have Ghosts of the Harvest by Lindsay Dua, and this is middle grade horror, so I do need to set your expectations. For some people, this might be entirely a skip, but I actually really love reading middle grade horror around the Halloween season, just because in my mind, I feel like it almost does those Halloween vibes better than adult fiction, because there's something about Halloween that almost has that magical quality when we are younger, and again, when we get older and have jobs and so forth. I think that it's harder to capture that in a story that again is centered around adult life. So this is a very simple, sweet story where we follow two sisters. They have moved to a new town. You find out at the beginning of the story, all in the setup, that there is this past trauma this one sister has experienced, and now she's trying to get past that, and she's very much scared and trying to overcome her fears in their new town. They find out that there is a series of disappearances, and of course it's the question of, are they related? Is there a supernatural reasoning behind it? And you have a horror story that ensues. Given the age category, you know this one is going to be very accessible. It's not overly gory or really gory at all. Instead, while it has some scares, it's all very much tailored to the age. So again, it feels very cozy and comforting to an adult reader like myself. I enjoyed it. Go in with the right expectations. If you're expecting this to be the best middle grade book you've ever read, I don't think it's to that extent, but again, as a short, sweet read, I do think it's great. And again, I know a lot of you comment on my channel that you do have nieces, nephews, or children that you're often trying to introduce into horror, so I do think it's a perfect family read if you're looking for that. And finally, I'm going to segue and talk about a thriller book, and that is called She Didn't See It Coming by Shari Lapena. This is an author who I've read many times before, and I'm always picking up her newer books because I've definitely found some hits among her books. This one is not my personal favorite, but it was still a fast page turner read. The basic premise is that we follow a mother and wife who has disappeared in this apartment building, and so we follow as the police are investigating and trying to figure out where she has gone. We get to follow this story from multiple perspectives of the various people living in the apartment building, and very quickly, without really spoiling anything, this is all in the setup of the book, is that everyone has secrets. Everyone has done something, has a history, and potentially has a reason that they might be involved with what is happening with this woman. And so the story is very much a question of, all right, everyone looks guilty, who is actually behind it all, and slowly is revealed what is going on. This is one that, in my opinion, really does suffer from having too many characters. I'm used to having large casts when it comes to thrillers because, again, half the fun is having those red herrings and having different people who look guilty but maybe aren't actually the ones behind it. But in my mind, this one just got a little too messy. Everything just got very incestuous, not in an actual way, but in the way that everyone is so tied together that it kind of felt ridiculous. Like, The entire building has way too much history, and I think a lot of people who can speak to this, where you live in an apartment building, you probably don't have that much of a relationship with your neighbors compared to these ones. So it's a book that started off strong for me and kind of waned in my enjoyment as I went through it, but again, it was such a fast read that by the time I was done with it, the book was done. Wasn't the strongest ending, wasn't my personal favorite by this author, but again, I'm still glad I read it just because I can't help but check her out, because occasionally she does write a book that really hits nail on the head for me, so I keep coming back to see what she's doing next. And before wrapping up this video, I do want to segue and talk about a few books that I did not finish, so these are not proper reviews, but just to mention a few more books that I did receive from publishers that I do want to mention to you in case this is something you want to put on your radar. Normally I do this in my monthly updates, but quite frankly, I forgot last month, and so I'm going to do that here. The first book I want to talk about is The Sister's Curse by Nicholas Alvenick, and this is one where I read the previous book in this series, which is all involving a daughter of a serial killer, and she's come to terms with that. This second book follows the same perspective, but instead she's investigating a totally unrelated case where there is this individual where perhaps there's something going on in this small town, and quite frankly, I think without the connection to the first story, where again it was much more personal, this one just didn't really hold my attention. Again, I definitely could have finished it, given a 3 or 2-star review, but it just wasn't something that was really up my alley. If you're a sucker for just a thriller story, this is one that might be a little bit more interesting for some of you than it was for me. Next one I want to mention is The Night Is Not For You by, oh, I'm going to say this wrong, Iman Quota, and this is an Orbit title. It's great to see them doing more horror. This one unfortunately just didn't really jive with me. This is one where we have this young girl who's growing up in this brutal neighborhood where there are murders, and she ends up unleashing the power of this female djinn in order to be able to protect herself and those around her. The premise sounds amazing, but if I'm honest, as you can probably guess, I just couldn't get into this one, so I did put it aside. But again, in terms of a premise and setup, I love a story of a character, especially a female character, latching onto some evil entity in order to protect herself. It sounds great as a premise. I just wish that it really held my attention in terms of the execution. And last, I want to talk about I'll Make a Spectacle of You by Patrice Winifred Eicher, and this is one that follows a grad student who is investigating or learning all about this ancient beast, and of course it's a story that becomes something more, but I haven't gone far enough in. Again, it's one where the actual writing style, all of that wasn't really grabbing my attention. It sounded like an interesting setup, but again, I'm really giving myself permission to focus on reading more books that are up my alley, even if they do come for review, and just be a little bit more mindful when it comes to reviewing books in the future. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful when I'm requesting in the first place. But this is one that again has an interesting premise that you might want to check out, or at least look up more reviews for before deciding if you want to give this a go. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out, and of course, once again, I'd love to hear from you. What are you reading this fall season? I'd love to have your recommendations down below. What are you reading? What are you enjoying? And what should I read next? So if you haven't yet, please do stick around. I have more Halloween and fall related content coming, and so hopefully you hit that little notification bell, give me a thumbs up if I deserved it, and then drop a comment, even just an emoji, lets me know you're here. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.